Hi, class. This is week 2, and I just want to apologize because we are going to be jamming through this material, and I'm only able to speak so long with the live lecture. So I apologize if you feel like I'm gypping you. I'm not trying to. I want to cover as much as we can and maybe get a little bit more in depth in the text with talking about real life, actual experiences, um, but also trying to cover what's here. I'm going to be skipping a lot of slides because if I went slide by slide, we'd probably end up being here forever, which I know none of you want. You do have an exam this week. We're covering 3 chapters of the text this class, and you have How to Raise the Perfect Baby, which when someone can figure that out, you can let me know. I have 3, I think, decent babies, but I don't think any one of them have been perfect. So you have that assignment due this week. So you have a lot going on in class, and you have a lot of text to get through. So I'll try to get through this as best as I can, so bear with me. Um, Lifespan is a lot to cover. Um, so clearly, as an infant is born, children when they're babies, they develop rapidly. It's kind of like when you see a puppy, and so much growth happens in such a short amount of time. And that's the same with an infant. So much change happens within the first 2 years of their lives, and especially with their little brains. And you can see if you've had babies that you've been around, or you've had your own children, you can see how just from the first few weeks of their lives, what they're able to understand and to know and to do. It just happens so very quickly. From being just anywhere between 6 to, let's say, on average 10 pounds, to growing and being able to walk in a year and potentially talk some and babble some. There's just so much development that happens at this beginning time of their lives. So there's synaptic development that's going on. Synapses are being created and some are being unused. And that's pretty normal. So there's a lot of activity that's happening in their brain. You have the neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change in response to experience. So you use it or you lose it. So that's where we talk about, and we're going to get into this in this one with attachment. But, if babies aren't being spoken to, held, um, played with, exposed to things, they will have some delays or have some problems. Infants who never get picked up when they cry. And I'm not talking about parents who are trying to sleep train or anything like that. I'm talking about babies that literally are laid in a crib, let's say in an orphanage type setting, are literally laid in a crib all the time. They literally will learn to not even cry because it doesn't matter. And that's really, really sad, but it is true. Myelin is the sheaths that go up on the outer layer of the synapses, and they help with description and timing. There's adaptive reflexes, so warn of possible neuronal development problems when weak or absent, and some persist throughout life. So they aid with survival. So this is all developing. This is kind of the sleep cycle, right? What we see with little babies. They're drowsy, they're fussy, they're sleeping lightly, they're in deep sleep. So they're awake and asleep a lot throughout the day. They might have some states of every couple hours they're doing this. Now, babies tend to cry once, like parents might be able to recognize like a food cry versus I just want to be picked up cry versus I have a wet diaper, something's irritating me cry. Um, and you might be able to recognize some of those things. Um, so anyways, prompt attention to crying in the first 3 months lead to less crying later. That's something that they're suggesting. And again, this isn't meant to be critical of anyone's parenting style or what anyone's doing in their own home, but these are just based on the research that's been done for this text. By age 1, 10 to 12 inches of growth, which when you think about that, how much growth happens in that very beginning time versus what happens over a grand scheme of time is crazy to think about. They triple in body weight. Toddlers reach half their adult height by age 2, which is crazy. when you think of how much is happening again at that beginning time. Um, so muscles, bones, all are being developed. A person's inborn timetable of motor skill development interacts with the other aspects of physical development. Opportunity to practice motor skills are important. So that's why we try to encourage parents to interact with their children, right? You know, those little mats where they can play with different toys or try to pull themselves up, or it's important that you engage them in those things to help build some of those skills. Researchers suggest there is a difference in the rate but similarity in the sequence of motor skill development. Um, so in that sense, like if we were to talk to parents, we need to um, we want to encourage them to help with motor skill development as much as they can. Obviously not forcing their kids to do anything that would be uh, harmful or destructive, but like, you know, engaging them in things where there can be motor skill adult development. So ossification is the hardening of the bones, which is a big important thing. Now you have some kids that have problems like brittle bone syndrome or things of that nature, and unfortunately parents find that out due to probably their kids breaking bones or having issues, and that's definitely not fun to go through as a parent. Sometimes even the Department of Child Services gets involved because, you know, a kid keeps getting hurt. But sometimes kids do have issues with their bones. A full, complete complement of muscle fibers is present at birth. A decline in muscle tissue to fat ratio occurs by age 1, and a change in muscle composition leads to an increase in strength. And that's probably why they're able to pull themselves up, right, and walk. Rapid growth during the first 2 years leads to stamina and ability to sustain motor activity without rest by the end of infancy. So experience influences motor development. African infant prosody, a pattern of traditional cultural practices, intentional and coincidentally promotes motor development. And this is, you know, every culture is going to do different things in their research and development. Currently in our culture, at least in our U.S. culture, which this wasn't the case, I would say probably in the 50s to 60s, formula became a big thing. So breastfeeding has been reintroduced and is very popular nowadays. Um, so they say breastfeeding is superior if it can be done. Now, that does not mean parents who can't do those things are bad parents, or that doesn't mean any of those things. Sometimes things of that nature don't work out for people and they aren't able to do formula. Some women choose not to breastfeed, and that's totally a personal choice. But based on research, they think, you know, very clichély, breast is best. But there are obviously a lot of different things that can be done for infants and have nutrition and be fed and be fine, you know. So solid foods, you know, parents, you know, they recommend you don't start eating solid foods until 6 months, and they're concerned too with food allergies. Some of you may know children who have severe food allergies, like, sorry, my screen's moving around like an earthquake. Like peanut allergies or things of that nature. So you have to be kind of conscientious of what you introduce to your child. I know I was very anal with introducing food to my eldest child, and like got way less anal as time went on. As a matter of fact, my youngest, he's 2, and he goes to daycare when I'm working, and I showed up when he was probably less than 6 months old, and they told me if I wanted to see a picture, and I'm like, sure, I'll see a picture. And I walk back to see him, and my baby is sitting in the high chair eating a ham sandwich and holding 2 cheese puffs. And I was like, oh my word. And then they show me a picture of him earlier in the day, and he had Oreos all over his face. And I said, well, do I need to still keep bringing baby food? Because, you know, I make all my baby food. And they said, I don't think so. And I'm like, oh, well, I guess that's one less thing I had to do. Now, if that had been my first child, I would have freaked out because I was very particular about what he was eating and all these things. But by the third one, I was like, ah, he's fine. And actually, he is the least picky eater of all my kids. And I think it's because he was introduced to Food Center. But that's a personal choice. You do need to make sure a baby is sitting up. He can sit without support, and that helps with choking and things of that nature, right? And usually they like to see that kids can show an interest. You'll see with some kids, they watch you eat, and they see you swallow and then they swallow even though they don't have anything. I remember with my other two, my middle and my youngest, when they'd just be watching us eat and they were just so jealous because like by the time I got to when I was feeding their baby food, like they wanted the pesto, they didn't want the baby food. So anyways, those are some usually signs of they're ready to eat. So um so again, this is a very controversial topic, immunizations. Um, Schools now, to my understanding, make you have your children be immunized before they start. So like even kindergarten, even a lot of preschools now, daycares, if your kids don't have vaccinations, then you cannot be part of those things. I don't know about the private sector with private schools, if that's a requirement as well. It very well could be. But the vaccinations are given to prevent disease. People have a lot of concerns with vaccines because there's so much that they group together right now. I think there's a few shots. There's like 3 different types of medications in them, which make people really nervous. But those are things and decisions parents have to take overall in this little chapter here. We're talking about just from birth to toddlerhood, all that's happening in the body, the physical changes, the cognitive changes, and just what's going on even with being a parent. So I hope that's helpful. I'm going to move on to chapter 5 now because I've spent some time here. And we're looking at the cognitive development here. And this right here, this little chart, and we have it goes up to 2 years old. And it just talks about, again, what's going on within the child, and then what are the characteristics. So this might be worth taking a deeper look at. So Piaget, he's one who's known for his stages. We're going to talk about Erikson and Freud also in a set of slides today, which maybe those names don't mean a lot to you, but they're pretty big within the world of psychology. So you'll get familiar with them throughout this class. So Piaget talks about object permanence, and that's the realization that objects still exist when hidden from sight. So even if I close my eyes, something could still be there, right? And we can see those things with kids, like with peekaboo. Like they may think that you're actually really gone when they close their eyes, and then they realize, oh, wait a second, you're not. Those kinds of things. At 2 months of age, infants show surprise when an object disappears, right? So it's fun. At 6 to 8 months of age, infants will look for the missing object. And at 8 to 12 months of age, infants will reach or search for completely hidden toys. So you can see their development, their maturity. So imitation, how many of you see little kids imitate? It happens at my house all the time. So they copy what's done by another person. So you stick out your tongue, they stick out their tongue. You close your eyes, they close their eyes. You can see it in lines at Disneyland, all those kinds of things. Kids imitate what they see. And this kind of just goes over the process and the age range of imitation. So challenges to Piaget's views are underestimation of infant cognitive capacity, inaccurate equation of infants' lack of physical ability with lack of cognitive understanding, and an underestimation of object permanence, appearance, and beginning. So these are what some people would challenge him as far as his thoughts. So recent theories. The recent theories are the development of object permanence is a process of elaboration and one of discovery. And the Baillargeon, I'm going to butcher this, so I'm just going to not say the title because I have a Baillargeon. So if I butchered that, so I apologize. Babies as young as 4 months old show signs of object permanence. By this may be tied to experimental situations. At around 1 year of age, babies can use object permanence sufficiently across situations. Piaget, every baby comes with a repertoire of sensory motor schemes by construction world understanding via experience. So their experience helps them develop those schemes. And now recent research is saying newborns have considerable awareness of objects as separate entities that follow certain rules. So it's just different thoughts on some of these things. Babies have inborn assumptions about objects and their movement. Violation of expectation method. So researchers create a pattern of movements for an object and then move an object in a direction the infant does not expect, and then they kind of see what happens. So moving on, just so we, because, okay, so classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and modeling. These are like forms of learning, right? A way of learning behavior. We talk about this with even older kids. So schematic learning is the organization of experiences into expectancies or known combinations. So at 7 months of age, infants actively use categories but not levels to process information. And by 2, there's already subordinate categories appear. So in infancy, babies respond to subordinate before basic level categories. So at 12 months of age, babies understand basic and supporting categories. At 2 years of age, toddlers partially understand smaller categories. And by 5 years of age, children fully understand categories. So babies as young as 3 months old can remember specific objects and their own actions for as long as a week, which is pretty astounding when you think about 3 months old is still pretty little. That's 12 weeks, clearly, right? That's parents are about ready to get back to work typically. Um, and I think they're realizing that there's more intelligence going on there than what we may have thought. Which a week is a lot of information, right? But kids are bright. You know, God designed us to be very intelligent. Um, So anyways, grammar rules are acquired before exception mastery. So rule-governed errors are made, and comprehension and production are guided by the language acquisition device. So this is the beginning of age of language. This is someone's thoughts. So the language acquisition device is basic grammatical structure for all human language, tells babies that there are 2 types of sounds, and enables infants to divide, analyze, and learn sounds of the specific language they are learning. So importance of soundness. So sounds. Infants are pre-programmed to attend to beginnings and endings of sounds and to stressed sounds. Programming is not attached to verbs or nouns, but to attention to sounds. And they say even in the womb, obviously children can hear and sense things. And so it's not shocking that they can do that once they're out of the womb. And they're creating their own sounds, right? They mimic, they start cooing and talking and babbling and things of that nature. Language follows rules as part of cognition, and language includes internal and external factors. Infants are born with biological preparedness to pay more attention to language than to other information, which is very interesting. The infant brain has generalized tools used across all cognitive domains, not a language specific neurological model. Language does not initially introduce new meaning, but expresses meaning already formulated. Children attempt to communicate and learn new words when these aids in the communication of thoughts and ideas. So that's why it's like so important that with kids, like we aid. I remember like with my oldest son, he was having a hard time talking or wasn't talking a lot, so I started getting concerned. And then I realized he wasn't really saying words because he wasn't being taught them. So I had to really step in and start having him repeat after me words and make sentences and do things of that nature because he wasn't in an environment where he was talking to other little kids. He was just with me and my husband. It was just the 3 of us. And that really helped develop his language, and it really helped him to grow in those areas. On their own, kids aren't necessarily going to just know all kinds of words and things. It's going to be based off of what is taught to them and what they're exposed to. Moving on to chapter 6. Now, chapter 6 talks a lot about daycare. We may get to that if we have enough time. If not, I don't want those of you who have children in daycare or no kids in daycare or know one day when you have kids, you're going to have to put them in daycare. I don't want you to be offended by some of what's being said in this chapter. It's just, based off opinion and research that has been done, but it's not to make anyone feel bad about themselves. So again, 2 main leaders in, development of a being are Freud and Erikson. So psychosexual stages. So you've probably heard of the oral, anal. There's more of them. Phallic stages. So talks about, we have the Oedipal relationship, which is, how the child relates to the mother or the father. So the oral stage is like, again, mouth fixation. So kids, they're nursing or they're using a bottle or they're sucking a thumb. And then Erickson has his stage at the early ages was trust versus mistrust. And the relationship goes beyond just the oral fixation right there. So, adoption and development. Non-institutionalized children adopted before the age of 6 months are generally indistinguishable from non-adopted children in security of attachment, cognitive development, and social adjustment. Children adopted at later ages with histories of institutionalization, abuse, or neglect tend to have more cognitive and emotional problems. I think that's absolutely 100% true, which is so sad because there's so many kids in the foster care system, and kids aren't necessarily institutionalized any longer. But if you can get a baby from birth and care for that child from birth, there's usually there's a way better outcome with attachment versus getting a kid when they're older. That's not to say to not foster or adopt kids that are older. By all means, I think people should. They show a difference because there's already been a history of whatever's happened in their young life that has affected how they attach. And you'll see this in reactive attachment disorder. There's two different types of attachment disorder. There's one where a child, because of their experiences, will attach to anyone. So they don't even know you and they'll call you mom. And you'll see that in certain situations. There's another attachment disorder where it's like they won't attach at all. Like they won't want to leave your side, or I'm sorry, they will attach to you. Well, it's an unhealthy attachment. They don't want to leave you. They don't want to go. So one, it's like, peace out. Anybody can be my parent. And that's scary because someone unhealthy could come up and take your kid and they would just be like, okay, I'll go with whoever. Where the other one's really difficult, but the kid won't leave your side. And so that can be very challenging for people, very stressful. And that can happen with an adoption or fostering situation. So synchrony, opportunity for parent-infant development of mutual interlocking pattern of attachment behaviors, takes a practice to develop and provides developmental benefits. So attachment is the emotional bond in which a person's sense of security is bound up in the relationship. So a strong emotional connection and bond is honestly life-giving. When there is a break in attachment for whatever reason, it deeply affects children, and it deeply affects them to their core. This is even where we see some personality disorder stuff. John Bowlby, I guess. I don't know how you say it exactly, but he wrote this really good book called Becoming Attached. And if you take the Human Growth and Development course later on, you'll read that book. If you don't take that course, I really do suggest that book. It's just a good book and help understanding attachment and attachment theory, because there's a lot to be said about a person's mental health and attachment. It's important. A mother's bond with her infant. The bond is dependent on synchrony. The mothers typically provide more routine caregiving than fathers do, which when you look at a nursing mother, what can a dad do? I mean, not that the dad can't be helpful and be present. That is very helpful. However, I mean, a dad cannot typically feed a nursing baby, right? And so sometimes it's hard for dad to know where to fit in. So generally at the beginning, it's all about mommy. But that doesn't mean dad isn't helpful or can't be present or be helpful to mom. After a few weeks, mothers talk and smile more at their babies, and when mothers observe or interact with their infants, their bodies release oxytocin, a hormone that is correlated with empathy and physical relaxation. And oxytocin is actually released too, I think, when there's an orgasm. And oxytocin is released at birth. And so that's just it's a feel-good feeling hormone. And that is something that happens in the bonding experience between mother and child. A father's bond with his infant also depends on synchrony. Fathers have some repertoire as mothers do. After the first few weeks, fathers begin to spend more time playing with the baby, watching and interacting. And culture may impact the interpretation of study results and the benefits of father's involvement. So Again, every culture is different with how much dad gets involved, depending on dad's job, the availability, um, cultural things that might create some level of not getting to bond. But I just even know with dads that I see today in today's age, typically in the US, they usually really like to be involved. And our society really allows for dads to be involved because we have ability for dad to take even time off, which was so uncommon years and years and years ago. So safe haven, these are characteristics of attachment. Safe haven, secure base, proximity maintenance, separation distress. So establishing attachment. So Bowlby's four phases: the non-focus orientation and signaling, focus on one or more figures, and secure base behavior, and internal model. So that's 24 months and beyond. So stranger anxiety, separation anxiety, and social referencing. Those are three different attachment behaviors, right? So some of this stuff is normal. Like your kid's going to have sometimes stranger anxiety, right? So when, um, like when they see a masked creature and they're freak out, like some of that's not uncommon. But when there is secure attachment, um, sometimes that doesn't mean that the kid, like if a kid doesn't cry when you leave, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're not doing a good job attaching. It just means the kid might feel more confident to leave because they know they have you, kind of thing. So anyways, so there's secure attachment, insecure and avoidant attachment, insecure and ambivalent attachment, insecure and disorganized attachment. And the attachment stability, according to the text, is dependent on consistency of the child's life and influenced by major upheavals, and internal models elaborate from year one until the age of 4 or 5. So and it really is modeled by the consistency that the children have, things of that nature, of what kind of stress that's been going on in the family, things like that. And then other caregiver characteristics influencing secure attachment. So marriage, right? Education, age, mental health. The securely attached are more sociable, more positive in relationship with friends, less clingy, dependent on teachers, less aggressive and disruptive, and more emotionally mature. Continues into adolescence, more likely to be leaders and have a higher self-esteem. Attachment quality and consequences. Increased sociability throughout early, middle, and late adulthood. Influence on parenting behaviors and foundation for future relationships. So when there's personality, stable pattern, how people relate to those around you, and temperament is the basic behavioral and emotional predispositions, right? So we can see the difference of those. I can see the difference in those in Ultimate Kids. Their personalities and temperaments are very unique to them. And some of that's nature and some of that's probably nurture. Okay, so I'm going to encourage you, obviously, to continue reading your text. There's a lot more here about attachment, and attachment is huge. So I challenge you, if you plan on having kids, you have kids, to really educate yourself in this area because it is such a big part of childhood, and it really sets up your kid for adulthood and on. Thank you so much again for this time. We're on week 2. Good luck with your test and your first project that is due. Have a good week. Thank you.